Hi, welcome to my channel. As promised a few weeks ago, this series about my piano quintet will become a documentary of how I write the piece week by week. At first, I thought that I would record myself while composing, but then I realized that it would produce a very large file that would not only be several gigs in size, but would also be very difficult to edit. So instead of doing that, I've chosen to make short recordings of the score whenever I think I've reached an important point, and then put all of those recordings together to show you a series of snapshots of how the piece progresses. But before I continue, please don't forget to subscribe, and if you like the content of this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with others so that educational resources like this are available to more people. The last time I made a video on this piece, I showed you the second movement and mentioned that it would lead to the third without a pause. At that time, I had already written some measures of the third movement, but I didn't show them to you. Let's listen to the last section of the second movement and how it leads to the third. There are several things to note here. First, the third movement is called commozione, which in Italian means commotion, shock. That's the main reason I don't want a pause between it and the previous one. I want the third movement to feel like it has been thrown at the audience without warning. Secondly, in the previous movements I mainly used set 732, the diatonic scale, but now in the third movement I introduce set 828. Generally referred to as the octatonic scale, which is not related to 732 in any way. In other words, it's not a superset, it doesn't contain set 732. This creates a very strong break in the harmonic development of the piece, thus reinforcing the meaning of the title. Also, set 828 is one of those pitch class sets that, used in certain ways, can sound a bit menacing, to me at least. Here we have a second snapshot of the third movement. I've had this idea in my mind since I wrote the first three measures a few weeks ago. I always wanted the figurations on the piano to make a long descent into the low register of the instrument, and that is what I've done here. There are a few interesting things to say about this new stage of the piece. The first is that I could have made the descent using a fixed pattern that repeats every octave. This is what most beginning composers would do, but for me that solution is too simplistic. Furthermore, a commotion is not exactly an event in which order prevails. It's messy, it's chaos. Of course, there are ways to write very chaotic things in music, and this is certainly not one of them. I have to confess that there are extremes that I don't want to go to with my music, and believe me, this is chaotic enough for me. So the 16th note sextuplets in the right hand descend almost randomly. Notice how the line breaks at different points, which helps prevent any patterns from being felt. Also, the left hand doesn't follow the rhythmic pattern of the previous measure. It then joins the right hand by playing 8th note triplets until both hands reach a minor third, a very typical interval of set 828. Another thing to note is the fact that measure 5 has an extra beat. So far, the time signature has been 4/4, and the listener will surely expect measure 5 to hold the trend. But I want to cheat this expectation to make the piece less predictable and thus more interesting. Therefore, I extended measure 5 a beat, which makes the climax happen in an unexpected place. Let's listen. New snapshot of the piece. There's been a small but important change in the piano part. In the last beat of the descent, the left hand also plays 16th notes. This feels like the descent was accelerated at the last moment, making reaching the climax a bit more dramatic. The climax also brings a new deception. Instead of a loud and continuous tutti, we get a short hit followed by a series of echoes on the strings. One of the features of this new section is that each string instrument repeats its note or notes one more time than the instrument that started earlier. So the cello plays a low C sharp 8 times, followed by the viola, which plays a minor 6th 9 times, and so on. Measure 7 also has 5 beats, and the last part has a new appearance of the piano that ends in another hit, followed by a new series of echoes. This is what this sounds like. Third snapshot. A tiny but nonetheless important difference between this and the previous one is the way the dynamics change on the strings in measures 4 and 5. Up to this point, all 4 instruments have identical dynamics, and I felt it would be a good idea to introduce some clutter. Therefore, crescendos and decrescendos occur in different places, helping to produce a much richer and more interesting result. If you look closely, you'll also notice a very significant change. There's an additional measure between the end of the descent on the piano and the echoes on the strings. Every time I played the piece, either in Doric or in my mind, I kept feeling something was wrong with the way the two sections came together. Something wasn't working, and the appearance of the second section was not only unexpected, but also clumsy. It took me a while to figure out what the problem was. I needed something in the middle, some kind of connection, so I extended the piano part, and to make it less predictable, I used a 5-beat measure again. Finally, I also decided to introduce a bit of randomness to the echoes on the strings, and, therefore, the repetition is different from the first one. It's followed by a second appearance of the piano that is also different from the previous one. It's longer and begins on a beat rather than a weak subdivision. Let's listen. Finally, a fourth snapshot. Everything up to measure 8 is identical to the last one. The first difference is that the last appearance of the piano has been moved. I felt like it was a bit late, so I started it earlier. The echo section has been extended following the same principles as before. Each repetition must be different from the previous one. The last appearance of the piano is also different. It has been shortened to just 4 notes. Finally, instead of using the piano again to reintroduce the echoes, they just appear out of nowhere, so to speak. As always, I'm playing with the listener's expectations. Until now, each set of echoes has been preceded by the piano, thus establishing a kind of pattern, but now I change that. The new echoes are also different, not only in harmony, but also in rhythm. In the measures that follow, I plan to play more with them, using 8th note triplets and groups of 16th notes. The movement has gone from having 9 seconds in the first snapshot to more than 40, and I've had to dedicate several hours to it, which shows that musical composition is not at all easy and requires a lot of patience and perseverance. Let's hear the piece one more time, now with the latest changes. I hope you found this video interesting. Next week, I'll show you how I've continued the composition of this movement. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a good weekend. Ciao.